Hello, and welcome back to the Bench to Boardroom podcast. I am your host, Cynthia Steele, and today's guest is Dr. Edritz Javelosa of the Charcot-Marie Tooth Research Foundation. I think I've introduced you to some pretty impressive women so far, but trust me, you ain't seen nothing yet. If we're thinking about career trajectory alone, nobody beats Dr. Edritz Javelosa. You'll see why. She came originally from the Philippines and then moved with her family, first to Michigan and then to Arizona, where she did her undergraduate degree in neuroscience and then moved on to get her PhD in neuroscience at Stanford University. Edritz is considered, or at the time she was considered, a first-generation low-income or FLY student. And we talk about how that's important and why a sense of community was very important to her as she was pursuing her undergraduate degree and eventually her PhD. After she graduated, she actually started working very quickly in the nonprofit sector. She spent a few years at the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and it seems like she took on a different job almost every year she was there, working in clinical research, working in database research, and then finally moving on to more like a portfolio management role, which altogether prepared her to become now the chief scientific officer at the Charcot-Marie Tooth Research Foundation. But as you'll hear, Edritz is very deliberate about her career choices. And she took some time really to think about whether or not this was a role that she wanted, whether or not this was a role that she felt she would be a good fit for. And at the end of the day, by asking for help and explaining early on what her shortcomings in this particular role would be, she ended up getting more than she even hoped for in this new position. And it's really a very remarkable story. Hers is a story I'm looking forward to watching as time goes on, because she is not done by any stretch. I look forward to seeing what she does next. But for now, here's my interview with Dr. Edritz Javelosa. Dr. Edritz Javelosa, thank you so much for coming to Bench and Boardroom today.
Thank you, Dr. Steele, for having me here. And, this is very exciting. I'm excited.
I'm so excited too, because I only know peripherally about your organization through a friend who has a grant through you guys. And so I'm looking forward to talking to you about your journey. We can talk some disease state. And then if there's anybody listening who is interested in applying for one of your grants, maybe we can talk about that too.
Yeah, definitely.
So
let's go ahead.
Yeah, let us know. Introduce yourself.
So my name is Edritz Javelosa. I did my PhD at Stanford University, where I received my degree in neuroscience. Previous to that, I attended the University of Arizona, where I received my bachelor's of science in molecular and cellular biology. Going outside a little bit of science, I was born in the Philippines. I lived there for almost 14 years. And, I think my immigrant story has just kind of brought me to the US. And that's kind of really where my educational journey started. And so I lived in Michigan right after the US. First experience in snow and, having a white, very cold Christmas. But, nonetheless, it was still exciting. And then after 2 years, my family and I moved to Arizona, where I did the rest of high school and attended a university. And then was very motivated by some of my professors and realized, how I wanted to stay in science. And wanted to know, how can I become a professor? Yeah.
Wow.
And yeah, and so that's kind of where my educational journey also started at the University of Arizona, wanting to, do more exploration in science and understanding the biology. As we all know, biology is so complicated, but which is what makes it great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that eventually led me to a summer internship at Stanford University in the neuroscience department. And, initially at that summer, worked on neurodegeneration. And so I had such a great experience, not only, with the science, but also having the type of support that I had during that summer, I think was probably the biggest factor in pursuing graduate school.
Hmm.
And yeah, and so I was like, all right, well, um, I want to do research. Let me try and see if I can get into Stanford. Um, and one story after the other,
Yeah.
here I am.
Amazing.
I'm still in California, now working for a nonprofit organization that is focused on CMT, which stands for Charcot-Marie Tooth.
Okay. Wonderful. I actually want to ask you, because I honestly don't know, what is the school system like in the Philippines? And like, what was your science education like? Was there something that sparked your interest as a little kid, or was it when you came to the US? Can you tell us about that?
Um, I think I was a little more curious. I think I was just like such a curious child.
Mhm.
Um, I don't necessarily think that my interest in science stemmed from my classes specifically. Um, you know, I can only speak in terms of, um, I guess we didn't have middle school there. So it was like elementary from sixth grade and then high school, but
Oh.
started at seventh grade till, eighth, ninth, and 10th.
Hmm.
I don't know if that has changed. It might have, but I'm not sure. But the way our classes were structured there is that the students actually don't move classrooms. So that
Oh.
was that was nice. We just stayed, and then the teachers would come in.
Hmm.
It's all mostly lecture based. Um, the difference that I feel like was a big, change in terms of the structure of the science classes in the Philippines and, my science classes in middle school and high school was that there's always some sort of like lab component.
Mhm.
So you get to tinker, which is like, I think the best part of it. I am such a visual and kind of like mechanical person. So the best way for me to learn is to either see it and visualize it, or I'm, doing something with my hands,
Mhm.
right? Um, and so I think growing up, I was just exposed to so many stimuli, in my environment, um, in terms of, the nature that is in the tropical areas.
Right.
Um, and then also, okay, this might be very corny. I used
That's
to
okay.
watch Bill Nye the Science Guy growing up. And um, oh, there was another cartoon show. It was like oh gosh, I can't remember what it was called. It was like, it had something with the bus.
Oh, the Magic
Um,
School Bus?
yes, the Magic School Bus. Oh my God. I enjoyed watching those growing up. And I think that also fueled my curiosity.
Sure.
And
But
yeah, and so I think that curiosity is just sort of built up over time. And then, really going into science more, I would say was fueled when I came to the US
okay.
because of the lab components
Mhm.
and really tying the theory with the application.
I really agree with that because I'm not a great memorizer, which didn't really help me when I was taking a subject like gross anatomy, for example, where there's no mechanism. Just
Yeah.
this is the structure and this is what it does and this is where it's located. And, you know, without that context, it was incredibly difficult for me. And as PhDs, as scientists, we're not taught to just memorize things you know, using acronyms or using any sort of devices, all the different ways that they used to memorize, like the brachial plexus, for example, they had all these crazy, sayings that they used to use. And I mean, I want to see the context. I want to see how it fits in. And it was really in grad school when I started to really appreciate that because we would, for example, we would learn about the MAP kinase cascade. Maybe that morning I just learned about ERK and junk and all those pathways, and then I would see a scientific poster where they would use an inhibitor of ERK or junk, and I would say, I just learned about that. And so that would like solidify things in
Right.
my head. So I agree with you. I'm not sure at the time how much I appreciated the lab component, other than it gave us a chance to, get up and move around. But I think in retrospect, it was incredibly helpful to solidify
Right.
the information that I was learning.
Right. Yeah. And I think that is one thing for me as well. And I think my background as being the first in my family to be able to, get a degree, not just with a PhD, but also as a Bachelor of Science, is that it's really important to be able to even relay, what are you doing
Mhm.
in a a manner where someone without a science degree can relate to.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
so I think that's always, kind of always in the back of my mind.
Mhm.
And and so everything that I do, I'm just like, okay, well, you know, like you said, you're looking at an inhibitor for ERK. Like what does the inhibitor do? And then people know what disease means.
Right.
Um, so if you can apply it to something that's relatable, then folks will be able to understand, like, oh, okay, this is what it means. This is what the pathway is supposed to be doing. And then be able to relate it to, oh, it causes this type of disease. But
Hmm.
if stop what's in between, maybe we stop the disease.
Right. Right. Did your parents also look like deer in the headlights at your defense? Because mine definitely did.
Well, actually, were they there? No, they weren't there for my defense.
Okay.
And this was before the time that they had uh, Zoom.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
um, so they did come for my graduation, but
Nice.
not for the defense.
Nice.
Um, but whenever it comes to explanation of what I'm doing, or even my degree, what my degree was in bachelor's,
Hmm.
I have to really simplify it
Hmm. They
and
say,
use.
my parents will say, Cindy's a doctor, but not like a real doctor, but she's like a professor doctor. Like there's no such thing as a professor doctor, but okay.
Yeah,
And
and
also,
actually,
I would argue we are real doctors.
yes, we are real doctors. It's just a different kind of doctor.
Yes, we just don't deal with patients.
Yes,
But then again,
and
you do. In some ways, you kind of do. So,
some ways I kind of do, but I don't give diagnosis.
correct.
That's the biggest part, because I've definitely had people, from my old hometown. They're like, "Oh, neuroscience, brain,
Mhm.
doctor.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just message her and ask her, hey, I've been having these symptoms."
Heavens.
I'm like, I would recommend that you go see a
Hmm.
medical doctor.
Yes. As an eye person, I get that all the time. Actually, my mother-in-law will text me sometimes and say, Dad's had some floaters. Like, there's been a lot of floaters in his eye lately, or his doctor says his pressure's up a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, that's okay. Just make sure that he takes his vitamins and et cetera, et cetera. In contrast, my real father has glaucoma and he won't tell me anything. Like, Dad, what's your pressure like? He's like, I don't know. How are your eye drops? They're fine.
Yeah.
It's such like an immigrant man thing. Like, nope, nope, I'm
Yep.
fine. Don't want to talk about it.
Yep. Yep. Yes.
So you mentioned being a first generation student. So tell me about that. Tell me what that means to you.
Yeah. So there's this acronym FLI. So FLI, which means first generation low income. And I didn't really know what this terminology meant until I came to the States. Again, there's a lot of like discovery, coming to the States, new environment, new culture. Um, and when I attended college, it almost seemed like my fellow classmates already knew, right, what was going on in college, even like the topics. It just seemed like it clicked for them. And I think when I would have discussions with some of my fellow classmates, and hear like, oh yeah, my dad or my mom is in the scientific field, they do this, they do that, and they have those resources for them, which was very different from my own experience, because I can't go back to my family and like, hey, we had this discussion about, astrocytes, for
Right.
example. Um, and they would just give me a blank face, or they would probably tell me to go ask, my uncle, who is a doctor, like an
Mhm.
MD, for example. Um, and so I think I found myself, there's definitely like this struggle as I continue to pursue higher education. But I also understood that, um, I just have to be resourceful
Yes.
in other ways, so that I can get the type of support that I need that I don't necessarily have at home.
Sure.
Um, and I really found that community was such an important component to becoming successful in my educational career. I was fortunate enough that during my time at the University of Arizona, that I came across the McNair program.
Mhm.
And so the McNair program is actually a national program. Um, Different institutions do have to apply for grants for this type of program, and it helps uh, undergraduate students to continue pursuing higher education, specifically in PhD programs.
Mm.
Um, and I think that was really a pivotal point when I, wanted to go into research, because I think it was the first time I ever set foot in a lab,
Yeah.
while I was a part of this program. And and then I think, no, back it up. I'm sorry. That is completely false, because I did get a summer internship before I started the McNair program.
Mhm.
And um, I that first summer internship did help me get into the McNair program, because it kind of backs up, my interest in pursuing research.
Sure. And that was back
Uh,
you said that was what, freshman and sophomore year in college or
yeah, so I think my first summer internship was around sophomore year.
well,
And then the McNair program, I started my third year of college.
well.
Hmm. Yeah. And then kind of continued on, throughout the remainder of my time at the University of Arizona.
Nice.
And yeah, and actually, because the McNair program, they provide you funding for the summer when you're doing research work.
Nice.
Um, my my first year, it was mandatory that we stayed, in the within the institution to do the summer program. But my second year, I had a little bit more flexibility. And so that gave me the opportunity to explore beyond the University of Arizona and, email professors like, hey, I have some money, I have funding for the summer.
Uh-huh.
Do you need an intern to work for you for 10 weeks?
Wow. I imagine
Yeah.
you had a fair amount of interest.
Surprisingly, a lot of them said no because what either they already took in summer interns and don't
Wow.
have the capacity, or they don't have like a mentor that would, for like one-on-one
Mhm.
mentoring. But Stanford was the one who said yes compared to
Wow.
all other California schools. So that's part of the reason I ended up doing a summer internship
Mhm.
at Stanford at that time. And then I, was fortunate enough to really have I would say, such a colorful
Yeah.
experience, just experience in a lab that was so supportive and just full of postdocs, because
Wow.
it was different from my previous, research experiences. Um, and then going to a new institution, right? Or being in California, for example.
And you're probably surrounded by other international students, right?
Yes, yes. A lot of international students. And funny enough, my college experience, I met a lot of international students because I had to work part time
Okay.
at the International Center.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So, so it was,
Mhm.
yeah, it was always exposed to all kinds of people, different institutions, different cultures.
That's really neat. Is
Yeah.
that what sparked your interest in DEI?
Not necessarily. I
Okay.
think it was more of my own experience as a first gen low income
Mhm.
student, and also understanding how much there's so much bias in the sciences,
Yeah.
and it goes
Absolutely.
beyond the sciences. As we look at, we listen to the news, we
Mhm.
listen to different, or we read different articles. At the height of the pandemic, so much was happening.
Yep.
And so I think it's really, those different factors that kind of helped me push efforts to stay involved and be proactive in, bringing in more representation, diversification, equity, and inclusion in the sciences.
Mhm.
Um, and oftentimes, you probably see more professors who come from, like who are male, um, white male professors. It's not very uncommon to see that. And so I think, and that influences your own experiences.
Absolutely.
And I didn't know um, how to become a professor when I was like, oh, I want to be a professor. But my initial thinking at that time, I was like, oh, but I don't look like any of them. There's only a few female professors.
Yeah.
And only my female professors were the ones like, you can go to, you can become a professor. You just have to attend grad school, do more research experiences. And so I think for me, that really was so important to know. I was like, well, if I'm feeling like this already, what are other women in the STEM field feeling, in particular women of color as well, and
Yeah.
come from, you know, first generation low income and other types of identities that are not represented in the STEM field.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. I just had a conversation very recently with some colleagues, and it was the previous episode that came out before this one, where we actually did mention how companies like the concept of DEI, and it's almost like this month is Black Awareness Month, and then June is Pride Month, and they kind of drape themselves in that just for that one month. Like there's rainbow flags everywhere, but July 1st comes and they're gone. And we feel like it's this beautiful idea, this diversity, equity, inclusion, and they can sometimes talk the talk. A lot of companies are good at talking the talk, but when it actually comes to walking the walk, they're not so great. And I love that you actually had that initiative to talk to some of your female professors and say, I don't look like that. I don't speak like that. I don't think like that. None of these men have had the experiences in their lives that I've had.
Mhm.
Do I fit in? Can I fit in? And we were just at a meeting over the weekend, and I mean, the foundation that held the meeting does a very, very good job bringing in women and people of color, and there's a lot of diversity when it comes to the panel moderators, but the companies will still send
Mm.
typically an old white man.
Mhm.
That it was very, very typical. And unfortunately, I mean, manels are just part of our lives at this point.
My
So
gosh, I've never heard that before.
yeah,
Manuals.
manels. Mhm. Isn't it perfect? It's so sad. But and one of my friends actually said to me, I didn't even notice it until you said something, because
Yeah.
we're just so used to it. So
Mhm.
I love knowing that there are people like you out there, and there's others who really do try to advocate, and certainly something that I try to do here at the podcast is to say, you can come from anywhere, you can start from anywhere. We all start in this like very small space. We're just tinkering in the lab, we're subbing slides, we're learning how to slice brain tissue or whatever it may be. But eventually you can grow and you can expand, and if you have the right people behind you, then that can definitely make a huge difference. So it doesn't matter if you grow up thinking you're going to become a vice president of a company someday. Most of the vice presidents did not think that that's what they were going to do when they first started out. So I think it's great that was also your experience, and you actually looked ahead and thought, can I actually do this?
Yeah, and I think that's maybe just, part of personal experience incorporated into the scientific journey,
Sure,
where moving from one country to a whole nother country where I didn't know what to expect.
sure.
I only knew what America was like based on, movies, and what to expect. So,
Hmm.
it's so different, right? And then sometimes it's just a matter of putting yourself out there,
Hmm.
um, to really understand whether you're able to do this or not. You quickly learn some of the things that you don't like. At least that's how it works for me. It's
Yep.
easier for me to identify what doesn't work versus what works, because again, like, I'm so curious. I love to learn. I'm always wanting to like know what's happening here, what's happening there.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's hard to narrow down. So
absolutely.
yeah, so
I
like
agree.
research, trial and errors.
Hmm. And I think it's important to also emphasize that you can ask. There
Mhm.
are people who you can talk to, and when you find people that you can trust, you can share these questions, these concerns with, whether it be a mentor, a mother or father figure, or just a friend.
Right.
Because we're all having these same thoughts, we're all having these same feelings, and so you don't have to deal with it alone, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes, and then it goes back again to having that community. That's
Yeah.
really important.
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to think of the word that was used when I was in grad school. Your hype crew. Yeah, so it's
Oh, I
important to
like that.
find your hype crew.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I love that, Edritz, because I mentioned that to some graduate students that I was talking to recently. I said, you've got to you have to have that friend. We all have at least a couple of friends who will say, like, yeah, you've got this. Yes, you should apply because you are qualified and you are awesome, and they would be so lucky to have you. Yeah, I like that. Everyone needs a hype crew.
Yes, definitely. And you just said, you should apply because you're qualified. And
Mhm.
I think it kind of goes back to DEI as well, is that And they've done studies with this too,
Mhm.
where women would look at an application, and if they don't fit all of the boxes,
Yes.
they don't apply. But with men, they just go for it.
Right?
So I think,
Yeah.
for my own personal experience, sometimes I do get the hesitation as well. But then I remember, I'm like, why am I hesitating? I
Mhm.
don't necessarily have to have all of the qualifications met. It's rather more of the journey that you
Mhm.
take, right, and versus not getting it because you didn't put yourself out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's actually why I so far have only interviewed women, because our journeys are totally different, and how we are encouraged or discouraged and how we are pushed or not pushed is completely different from a man's perspective. And in large part, it does have to do in some ways with society. It has something to do with, the way we're brought up. But, I also feel like there's other considerations like, will I still be able to be a good provider, a good mother, a good wife, a good sibling, a good friend. We take on so much care work in a way, and that always comes into consideration whenever you're applying for a new job or something that's very intensive. Not only does that imposter syndrome kind of creep in and say, you may not be qualified for this job, but on top of that, maybe you look at a job that's 50% travel. Well, you're thinking of who's going to take care of my pets, who's going to take care of my kids. God, in some ways, who's going to take care of my husband? You know what I mean? So there's always, I guess, in a way, our way of thinking. It seems to me like it's more complex. There's always more ways, more things that we think about as we're entering a new sphere or a new era in our lives.
Right. There's
And
so many dimensions
yeah,
and
yeah,
different factors that we have to include. So yes, it's never just like one one narrow thinking. It's
right.
like, okay, what would happen if I do this? What would happen to that? Do
Mhm,
I have this experience? How
right.
can I, relate my current experience now to what they're asking for?
Yeah, totally. So I ask everyone this question, and I'm going to ask you as well. I'm very curious about your answer. When you were at Stanford and you're getting your PhD, what was your this is too much. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. What was your give it all up and run away fantasy job?
Oh, was my give it all up runaway fantasy job. Um,
Like I
you
was
know,
going to go make cupcakes. Like, you know, friends of mine were going to open coffee shops, and things like that. You know what I mean? There's only one person I've talked to who has said, I've just always wanted to be a chemist. And I say, okay,
so
that's incredibly boring.
so actually, so I got into rock climbing,
Mhm.
more into rock climbing, especially outdoor rock climbing while in graduate school.
Nice.
And I would probably say, yeah, if I could have been, like a guide or something as a
Yeah.
climbing instructor, I think that would have been such a great alternative,
Yeah.
I would say. And I say that because, I mean, I still think about it too, till this day. It hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the one thing I like about rock climbing is that, again, you're exposed to different stimuli. You're outside.
Mhm.
It's a form of meditation, so does something to your brain chemistry,
Sure.
um, and physiology. You're working, your body. You're trying to get up that mountain, and so there's always components of science.
Mhm.
Uh, and I do find these types of activities a lot more exciting and, very interesting,
Sure.
because again, like, I think it's always just going to be about science, but how can I, relate that to other parts of me, that doesn't necessarily involve being in a bench.
Yeah. I love that. I do think exercise can be very meditative, even just out for a walk, out for a jog, Um, honestly, my husband and I are scuba divers, and I find that
Oh,
to be very meditative because, I mean, there's literally nothing else you can do, just breathe and float along and look for things and look at things, there's nothing else you can do. You can't even talk in those moments,
true.
so you know you we have very creative hand signals for each
Yeah.
other as we try to communicate non-verbally, but it's just something really wonderful about being able to quiet your mind, and
Hmm.
especially like just on a walk or on a jog or something, and just shake off some of that extra anxiety. And then when you're done and you have this clearer head, things become much clearer after that. Like this thing that you've been mulling over for days, suddenly you're like, oh, it's so
Yeah.
simple.
Exactly. And exactly. And I don't know if you had the same experience, like, in graduate school or just when you were doing your research in the lab, is that oftentimes you come to a blockage with your experiments
Oh yeah.
and challenges. And, you can beat your head over and over and over again, but sometimes it might just require you to walk away
Yes.
from the bench,
Mm-hmm.
go home,
Yes.
reset, come back with a refreshed mind, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, my mentor used to have those days, and he would tell us, like, look, if you can't even get a protein assay to work, just put everything down, walk away. Your
Mhm.
Western blot can stay for another day. It's not a big deal. Go home and shake it off. Like whatever it
Yeah.
is, go home, shake it off, come back tomorrow. And I always appreciated that because certainly there were days that we all were like, nothing's working.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go make cupcakes, but I will see you tomorrow. Like I can't.
Makes you feel better.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. So let's talk about how you got that first job. So you wanted to be a professor. When did that change?
Um, I think it changed when I found out funding is such a big deal in academia. And, I think with the amount of PhDs that are um, available within the United States versus the amount of academic jobs, it's such a competitive field. And, again, going back to DEI and I think it was, it does seem to be overwhelming. It does get overwhelming. And I think for me, I came to an understanding where, okay, well, what are some of the values that, are important to me? And how can I find those values in my next phase of my career? And understanding that I don't necessarily have to mentor in an academic space, uh, be able to do science outside of an academic institution, and also still create impact. Then that made me realize, like, okay, I don't necessarily have to be a professor, right? To be able to influence the younger generation and be able to have impactful work. And so understanding what those values are, it helped me find um, avenues or different institutions or companies and organizations where I could still do science work, but then be able to have impactful work as well. um, yeah, and actually I did this survey. I think it's through Science,
Mhm.
where you put in all the different values that are important to you, and then you kind of rank them. And then actually the first thing that popped out was a medical science liaison.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was just like, oh, what is a medical science liaison, at that time?
Everyone
And
wants to know.
yeah, and I think that was the other thing too that I was going through while I was in graduate school, is just a lot of path finding,
Mhm.
because um I know my institution at the time, at least the program directors, they were very supportive in terms of um, careers beyond academia.
Yeah,
But there wasn't really a lot of information that is being provided. So there's still a lot of proactive endeavors that you have to do yourself to find out, what's out there for someone with a PhD in
totally,
science.
totally. Is that
Yeah.
my IDP that you're talking about?
Yes, yes, that's what it was
Yeah.
called.
The very, very first episode of this podcast is with my very dear friend, Alicia Case, and she still uses my
Oh, cool.
IDP. She used it to help her, as you say, help guide her towards what she wanted to do. But I think she still uses it,
That's
when it
good.
comes to her own career development and thinking about next
Yeah.
steps. And, and actually, another friend actually knows the person who created my IDP. So it's
Oh, cool.
amazing how much impact it's made.
Yes, and I do think like those are tools that you can keep,
Yeah.
in your resource folder. Um, and I'm constantly thinking about, okay, well, I've, harnessed this new skill or knowledge.
Mhm.
What could that look like in
Yeah.
the future, right? And how could
Yeah.
I utilize that? And what does the next career look like? So I'm always thinking,
Mhm.
what does that look like professionally? Is there growth in my current state? And what would that look like? Or what would I want for
Right.
my future state?
I think that's so important because in a lot of ways, and you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, there's so many PhDs and there's so little funding. And the
Mhm.
funding that is there, I joke like NEI or NIH in general, but in my experience, the National Eye Institute, it feels like a force field, and you have to try to penetrate through that force field for them to even look at you. And then
Mhm.
once they start looking at you, then you have to have a competitive score and who you're
Yeah.
working with and who your letters from and everything. It's just such a challenging process. But I always maintain that that's not enough to abandon science. If that's what you truly want to do, you want to be at the bench, then don't give up.
Right.
This is still something that you can do. But if your values, you value communication, you value mentorship, you value free time, you value, some sort of work-life balance, and you just know in your heart, like this is not a good fit for me.
Yes.
You have to start there. And
Yes.
I love how you said that because I completely agree. It has to come from your values versus, I'm so frustrated. I'm just going to go teach somewhere
Right.
because you're going to be miserable there too, until
Right.
you figure out what it is that you really want and find a job that fits in with your
Yes.
values, at a company that fits your values.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think I was just lucky enough that while I was in my, path finding
Yeah.
um uh, I guess in 2019, just before I was finishing up with grad school, a friend of mine told me about, patient advocacy groups and nonprofit sector.
Mhm.
And I didn't even think about it at that time. And I was like, oh, what, wait, do they do science? Because I'm like, in
Oh,
my own assumption, it was just like, oh, they fundraise, they create community types of events, like really bringing in community and some sort of like educational components to it
mhm, mhm.
to know more about the diseases or what the program is about. And so when he had said, oh yeah, I used to volunteer for the summer programs with the Muscular Dystrophy Association.
Mhm.
Uh, they have a clinical and scientific department. But the scientific department, they don't do any research. So I started looking more into this and I was like, oh, wow. It's like they've been around for, over 70 years.
Yeah.
and have contributed to research. And the same goes with the CMT Research Foundation, which is
Mhm.
the organization that I'm in with now, where we're really focused on funding research and pushing the amount of people who are trying to develop and find treatments and therapies, with the hope of finding a cure. So a
Right.
lot of times, many diseases in CMT, Charcot-Marie Tooth, for example, to date don't have cures.
Yeah.
And so, and it does go back, kind of going back full circle, in terms of, wow, how much impact can you make if you're trying to help funnel, the amount of science, amount of research
Yeah.
that's being done in this field. And then eventually, like, something will come up. And I
Yeah.
think it's such a gratifying feeling. And just even thinking about it, like, is exciting.
Oh, absolutely. So you started looking. So you started looking in 2019?
Yes.
Okay. And we just started 2024. So I am to understand that in less than 5 years, you went from graduating with a PhD at Stanford, and now you are the chief scientific officer at the Charcot-Marie Tooth Foundation.
Yes, that's correct.
That is a meteoric rise, and I do not think you should downplay that at all. That is unbelievable.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's talk about this like meteoric rise that you've had, So you go from graduating and you learning about these patient advocacy groups. So what was your first role at the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation?
So I actually worked with the clinical research group.
Okay.
And so what that entailed, and then mind you, I started in October of 2019,
Hmm.
and then pandemic hit in early 2020.
Yeah. Talk about timing.
Yes. And so I was the regional director for the like Northern California, Pacific Northwest, and Pacific Northwest, and Alaska was also part of my region. But we didn't have a clinic at that time in Alaska.
Hmm.
And so there was a lot of relationships with KOLs.
Yeah.
So it's very, very similar to medical science liaisons,
Yes.
actually.
That in and of itself, I want to linger on that point for a second because so many people they hear about the MSL role. It is a phenomenal role if you can get it. Challenging, does present its challenges, but it's a wonderful job opportunity. It's a wonderful career to have.
Mhm.
But you are the first person to talk about an MSL-like role in the nonprofit sector. And so
Yes.
I just want to emphasize that there may be opportunities like this in regions where maybe our listeners haven't even thought about yet.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there are some distinct features
Hmm.
between, my role then at MDA versus what an MSL actually really does. There's a lot of similarities where, there's KOL relationships. The difference with my role at the time is that I wasn't necessarily talking about, um, you know, results or analysis of the drug because we didn't develop drugs,
Sure.
right? And I wasn't in the research department at that time either. Um, so it was really closely, talking to the KOLs in terms of like what are their needs, what's happening
Hmm.
within the organization, how can we collaborate and help each other, what are some of the needs of the patients as well, because those are sites where they have MDA clinics.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So,
yeah, so I did that for, October 2019 till probably March 2020, where I would pop in to the clinic, say hi, hello, how are things going, be able to interact with a few patients. And then with the pandemic, we all went virtually. Um, so that also, I, caused some reorganization of the the organization. And I had, oh gosh, I think I had 9 people at that time who was working with me.
Okay.
And with the pandemic, I ended up having, I think, one person,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
The
know?
travel-based roles kind of fell apart when we couldn't go anywhere anymore.
Yeah. And that was the hard part with a lot of foundations and nonprofits is
Mhm.
because, a lot of the fundraising it was in person.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of pivot in, how can we come up with novel ways to do this virtually and still be able to make money so then we can keep funding the programs that we're already doing.
Mhm.
Yep. And so eventually, I was the regional director. Then I went to the research department, actually. So I went to the science department and I worked for 1 year, about a year, in developing, kind of help develop our database, our data hub. Um, and really putting some more infrastructure there. And that was very interesting and fun because I learned something new. I've never worked on databases before, and putting together governance and how the data should be used.
Mhm.
So that was, again, my curious mind was being fulfilled. And but after a year, I went into a portfolio director role,
Okay.
um, partly because our portfolio director at that time had moved on to a different organization. And so our EVP had said, hey, we really need someone with a PhD for this type of role.
Mhm.
Would you be interested? And I think for me, what was so interesting about it was that you'd be able to follow the science a little bit more closely
Sure.
because these are projects that the organizations have funded already. And then, you also get to experience like grant management, what would happen, the process when applicants are sending in their proposals. So I think it was such a cool thing to be entrenched in the sciences and the research without having to do the research
I
myself.
know, right?
So that was the exciting part. Yeah. And then all of that experience actually as a research portfolio director really helped funnel, the transition to my current position. Before I had left the Muscular Dystrophy Association, I was already collaborating and working with CMT Research Foundation. While I was with MDA, we were able to do a co-funding for a project, and that time really helped me get to know the folks at CMT Research Foundation. And when their CSO left, uh, he he was so nice, such a great person, and
Mhm.
also scientist, and did a lot for the foundation. And he, emailed me personally and had said that he was going to a different organization, and then the CSO role is available. um,
Wow.
and yeah, and I mean at that time, and I think going back to you know um, to imposter syndrome, and knowing that I've only have this much experience under my belt,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm capable of doing this, right? And I didn't apply right away. I didn't apply for the position right away, and it wasn't until probably 2 months after he had sent that email that I reached out to the CEO. And I had asked her, just out of curiosity, if they found a CSO. And for me, it was genuinely wanting to, oh, it would be great to meet them, talk about different collaborations while I
Sure.
was doing the MBA. And she responded, no, they haven't. If I knew someone who would be a good fit, to let her know.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at a conference at that time, so I wasn't able to respond right away. And then I had, I see a follow-up email asking if I was interested by any chance.
Mm-hmm.
And again, kind of went back to, oh man, I don't know if I'm interested. I just don't know if I can, if I'm
Yeah.
capable.
Yeah, of course.
And I think there was a lot of um, talking myself into just try. The worst thing you can get is a no,
Sure.
right? And
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to my philosophy where if you don't put yourself out there, you're never going to know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd rather just try it than not trying and regretting. And so I did. And, I've had multiple conversations during the interview process. I was very candid in terms of, I'm young. I still have a lot of experiences that I need to learn.
Yeah.
And, this would be a huge learning curve for me if I take on this role.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're comfortable with that, then I think it'll be okay. And so, since the day I've started, I've had tremendous support. Um,
That's wonderful.
and and my CEO actually gave me this amazing gift. I've never had it happen to me before, where she provided an executive coach for
Oh,
me.
wow.
Yeah. And funny enough, because like my friends and I were just talking about, oh yeah, like there's my someone in our group like had an executive coach and it was amazing. And I'm just like, oh, that would be so cool to have. And
Mhm.
then, eventually my CEO, my boss was like, well, I hope you see this as a gift.
Uh-huh.
I was just like, oh my gosh, yes. Thank you so much. This is amazing.
So what is an executive coach? Describe what this person does for you.
So we usually try to, um, identify goals
Okay.
for the week, and I can't. I think we met every biweekly. I believe we met biweekly,
Mhm.
and she just guides me in the thinking process. Why am I doing this? Do I
Mhm.
understand what the goals are? Do people who are involved in this project or tasks know what they're doing and what the expectations are? How to communicate with different groups of people.
Yeah.
Uh, as simple as like, for example, sending an email um, to get people to be accountable,
Mhm.
right? And be very understanding of your leadership style as well. So I thought that was really helpful for
Wow.
me.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, so it's just she didn't know the science,
Mhm.
but knew how to work with people. How
Yeah.
do I make myself as make myself and as the leader,
Mhm.
and just kind of hone that uh what's the word I'm looking for, um be able to gain more confidence even though you don't necessarily have this specific experience,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so, and tying that into my leadership style. So there's like specific words that, we would use that would feel comfortable for me, because sometimes I'm like, that doesn't really sound like me. And so
Synergy.
yeah, exactly. fitting those different synergies in a way that I'm comfortable,
Sure.
but in a more professional setting as well.
Absolutely. So there's so much about this story that I absolutely love. And I think I guess my first question is, between the time that you were originally approached about this role and then the second time you're approached for this role and eventually you going through the interview process, um, what were you thinking about, as you were thinking about this role, besides can I do this? I guess, what were some of your other considerations as you thought about moving from this one role at one foundation to this major leadership role in another organization? What were you thinking about?
Yeah, I think support was really a big deal for me, and then I
Hmm.
think that's why I was very candid
Yeah.
during the interview phase, um, because also for me with the MDA, we were a much larger organization,
Hmm.
while CMT Research Foundation is smaller, it's newer, but they have a lot going on too. And so I think understanding that if I take on this role, would I have the type of support that I would need?
Yeah.
Because research is such a big component, if not the component
Yeah.
of research foundation.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important, because I think, especially as students and as postdocs, we always feel like we have to have the answer, and I would tell people all the time, it's okay if you don't know the answer. And when I was an MSL, I would tell sales reps this all the time. If you don't know, tell them you don't know. You can find a more eloquent or fun way to say it, whatever your style is, but it's perfectly fine to say, I'm not sure. Let me get my MSL to contact you, or, I'll get somebody at the company to find a paper or something. Find that resource for you. And it's okay. And as somebody who started a new job full time at the beginning of this year, and something very, very different for me, um, I ask all the time.
Oh,
And I have no problem telling people, I'm still new. What does that acronym mean? Or what is the appropriate process for this or for this? Because once you dive into the science, then that's kind of like the comfort zone, right? But it's everything else that's built around it that can seem so intimidating. And so I love that you're very candid. Like, I'm young. You're very, very young. I have no experience in this role. I will need help. And you got it, and that's, I guess I want to emphasize that it's okay to ask for help, because you might end up with an incredibly supportive, manager, boss, mentor who says, yeah, that's fine. We will help
yes.
you. We will take care of you and bring you along, you know?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
otherwise, if you had said yes and didn't say, yeah, yeah, I need help, I mean, maybe you would have still gotten it, but there are alternate universes where you would have been miserable because you would have just been completely overwhelmed, right?
Yes, exactly.
I love that you led with that, and you took your time to think about it, and my negotiation class, they always said, don't, if you need to walk away, you need to step out of the room, you need to, and that always gives me palpitations. You know, I
Yeah,
have I have such FOMO. Like, no, I can't walk away because what if, but you did, and you gave it a lot of thought, and I absolutely love that. That's wonderful. And
yeah, and I still do that with everything that I do
yeah,
to this day. I would say, um, when it comes to the professional side of me,
mhm,
I take a lot of time in processing, but and then I'm trying to incorporate that as well with the personal um, aspects of my life as well. It's
sure.
like really just processing through everything, try to be introspective,
Mhm,
and going back for a walk, for example, like you
yep,
said, just
mhm,
stepping out for a minute or two
yeah.
and breathe. throughout the process as well.
And don't go from making that decision to doom scrolling on Instagram, because that's not going to help you. You need to quiet your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just minimize the noise
Yeah.
and yeah, try to practice that focus as
Mm.
well.
Back at your time at MDA, it seems like you had a lot of support for trying out these different roles. And I know not every organization is like that. So it seems like you were incredibly fortunate to work for people who said, "Yeah, you wanna go from clinical trials to learning about research databases, and then you wanna learn about managing portfolios." I mean,
Mhm.
I guess, how did you do that? Who did you have to talk to, or was there pushback on something like that? Or how did you do
Um,
that?
No, I don't think there was really pushback. I think again, like you said, I think it was just fortunate that I was fortunate to have bosses
Mhm,
who were very supportive in terms of, you know, here are my interests. Can I, dabble into this? Can I be a part of the group and,
mhm,
trying to find synergies as well. Um, yeah, and I think it was great because, my boss really understood how important DEI was for me as
yeah,
well. So before I even left the Muscular Dystrophy Association, I was able to help them create a summer program for undergraduates who come from non-traditional backgrounds
mhm,
and are very much underrepresented in especially in the neuromuscular space. So the effort was to try and introduce them into neuromuscular research and studies. And so last summer was the pilot, and
mhm,
I think it went well.
wonderful.
Uh, so yeah, and then they're continuing to do the program. So I was happy about that, you know, and and I think that what makes a group and company very supportive, or in terms of offer some of the great values,
Mhm,
because they're open to seeing your growth,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Not necessarily it's just about like what they want. um, and with CMT Research Foundation, not even having to ask for it, my boss gave me an executive coach, which
amazing.
was amazing.
Yeah, that
And I think there's just so much value in that, and then you can go so much further,
mhm,
uh, with the connections that you have with your colleagues or your own professional career, personal career. Um, and that's something that I think I will always look for whenever, whatever is in the near future for me.
right. Yeah, you are so far from retirement. I think you're gonna take over the world at some point.
I don't know about take over the world, but to, do something impactful. That's always
Surgeon
my
General of the United States. How about that? You'll end up with an MD at some point.
actually, it was funny. I was bouncing off ideas with my friend last night,
Mhm.
and then I was just like, "Oh, what would be so good for travelers?" So other thing that I'm really into is traveling.
Yeah.
um, Backpacking type of traveling, very minimal. And and so I told her, I was like, from my own experience, it would be great if we had this kind of service. I think it would just make it so much easier for the travelers.
Hmm.
And then she said, "How are you going to make money?" I was like, "Oh, I didn't even think about that part."
Right.
It was more for like the ease of the traveler and not
Yeah.
necessarily um, trying to create like how I'm going to be able to fund this or make profit out of it. And so I think my mind is always like thinking about the impact first
Mhm.
versus, monetary components of it.
I love that.
So
So, in the last couple minutes that we have, I want to ask you, since earlier in this interview we talked about your hype crew. So, out of curiosity, what if you could be somebody else's hype crew? So say there's some young first generation low income students who might be listening to this right now, and they're thinking, wow, maybe I'm feeling pretty inspired, maybe I should consider, a job in industry. Can you be that young lady's hype crew? What would you say, or what do you say to students who need a little boost?
Yeah, so I think what was, would be very helpful from my own experience, again, just use this as an example. Be proactive. Don't limit yourself just because you don't check all of the boxes. I think it's always good to understand what works for you and find what is the best fit for you. Understanding, again, going back to the values versus, oh, this was not great because I had to work from, 5 to 10 p.m., right? Um, so understanding needs and values versus wants. Um, and then also ask for help. It's so important, and having those kinds of conversations, because you'll never know the other person and what their experiences were like.
Amen.
And unless you have those conversations, and you might actually be able to connect and learn from their own experiences as well. So I would say go for it. um, of course, have a plan. Have a plan in terms of like how you're going to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And trust in yourself that you're capable. You're more than capable.
Absolutely.
As long as you put your mind into it, there's dedication.
Yeah.
Definitely be achieved.
I love that. How can people find you if they need to get in touch with you, or if they want to contact you for more info?
Either email, do I put in CMT Research Foundation.
Okay.
If you do want to know a little bit more about the organization, and then you'd be able to find my email as well, which is edritz.javelosa@cmtrf.org.
Okay.
And if there are more follow-up questions in regards to CMT or, my professional and personal journey, I'm more than happy to have those conversations.
Can people link up with you on LinkedIn?
Yes, also LinkedIn. Yep.
Okay.
Edritz Javelosa.
Okay.
I should be the only one, unless it's another Edritz. I'll have to meet them.
I think you are, but yeah, that's a good point. Make sure it's the right one. Dr. Edritz Javelosa, this has been an absolute delight. You are incredibly inspirational, and I hope that everyone listening understands that it can be done with the right mindset, with the right people behind you. You too can have a meteoric rise. And I cannot wait to see what you're going to be doing in 5 more years, because I'm expecting big things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Steele. Thank you for the kind words. And again, thank you for having me on your podcast. Such an honor.
Of course. So nice talking to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Once again, I want to thank Dr. Edritz Javelosa for joining me today. For those of you who are interested in my IDP, this is the second time that my IDP has been mentioned on the Bench to Boardroom podcast as a resource for those who are looking for jobs, as well as those who are just seeking further career development. I believe you can find that at myidp.com or through Science Magazine. If you're interested in Charcot-Marie Tooth disease or Charcot-Marie Tooth Research, you can find more resources at the website that Edritz mentioned to you. And you can also contact her on LinkedIn if you have questions about the disease, about grants, or if you see a little bit of yourself in her and would like to talk a little bit more about her personal career trajectory. As always, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.